The Soviet Union, a name that once echoed with power and fear, it was a symbol of strength, a force that shaped the geopolitical landscape of the 20th century. For much of the 20th century, it stood as a giant, a rival to the United States in a world on the brink. The Cold War era was defined by this intense rivalry, with both superpowers vying for global dominance. This vast empire, stretching from the Baltic Sea to the Pacific Ocean, was born out of revolution and turmoil. The Russian Revolution of 1917 marked the beginning of a new era, with Lenin and the Bolsheviks promising a utopian society. Its story is one of incredible triumphs and devastating failures. From launching the first human into space to the tragic Chernobyl disaster, the Soviet Union's history is a tapestry of contrasts. The Soviet Union was more than just a country. It was a way of life, a culture, and an identity for millions of people. Its influence permeated every aspect of daily life, from the arts to industry. It was an idea, a vision of a world transformed by communist ideology. The dream of a classless society where everyone was equal drove the Soviet narrative, inspiring both hope and fear. Born in the aftermath of World War I, it promised equality, progress, and an end to oppression. The early years were marked by intense struggle as the new Soviet state sought to consolidate power and build a new society from the ashes of the old. But the reality, as we know, was far more complex. The Soviet Union was a land of contradictions where grand visions often clashed with harsh realities. Political repression, economic challenges, and social upheaval were constant companions to its lofty ideals. In the early 20th century, Russia was a land of deep contrasts. The Tsar, a relic of a bygone era, ruled with absolute power. Meanwhile, millions of peasants struggled in poverty. Discontent simmered, fueled by social inequality and the devastation of World War I. In 1917, the simmering tensions boiled over. The Tsar was overthrown and Russia plunged into revolution. From the ashes of the old order, a new power emerged, the Bolsheviks, led by the charismatic and ruthless Vladimir Lenin. Lenin, a student of Marxist theory, envisioned a socialist utopia. He promised peace, land, and bread to the weary Russian people. But his vision was soon tested by civil war and economic collapse. After Lenin's death in 1924, a power struggle erupted within the Bolshevik Party. Emerging victorious was Joseph Stalin, a cunning and ruthless dictator. Stalin consolidated his power, eliminating his rivals and imposing his will on the Soviet people. Under his iron rule, the Soviet Union underwent a period of rapid industrialization and collectivization, but at a terrible human cost. In 1941, the Soviet Union faced its greatest test yet, the invasion of Nazi Germany. World War II, known as the Great Patriotic War in Russia, was a brutal conflict that left millions dead and the country in ruins. But from the ashes of war, the Soviet Union emerged as a superpower, its military might undeniable. The victory over Nazi Germany came at a staggering price. Millions of Soviet citizens perished, both soldiers and civilians. But the war also forged a deep sense of national pride and unity. The Soviet people had stared into the abyss and emerged victorious. Section 5, Cold War Confrontation, a Divided World. The aftermath of World War II saw the rise of two superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union. These nations, once allies against the Axis powers, now found themselves on opposite sides of a new global conflict. The ideological divide between capitalism and communism became the defining feature of this era. These ideological rivals faced off in a global chess match known as the Cold War. It was a period marked by intense espionage, with the CIA and KGB constantly trying to outmaneuver each other. The stakes were incredibly high as both sides sought to expand their influence around the world. It was a time of espionage, proxy wars, and the constant threat of nuclear annihilation. The Korean War and the Vietnam War were just two examples of how this conflict played out in various parts of the world. Both superpowers supported opposing sides in these wars, turning local conflicts into global confrontations. The Cold War was a clash of ideologies: capitalism versus communism, democracy versus authoritarianism. Propaganda was a powerful tool used by both sides to sway public opinion and gain support. Protests erupted in many countries as people voiced their opposition to the policies and actions of the superpowers. It played out on a global stage, from the divided city of Berlin to the jungles of Vietnam. The Berlin Wall became a symbol of this division, separating families and friends for decades. Meanwhile, in Vietnam, the war raged on, causing immense suffering and loss of life. The world held its breath, fearing a conflict that could escalate into nuclear Armageddon. The Cuban Missile Crisis brought the world to the brink of nuclear war, as the United States and the Soviet Union faced off over the placement of nuclear missiles in Cuba. People built bomb shelters and held anti-nuclear protests, hoping to prevent a catastrophe. Section 6: Sputnik and space reaching for the stars. Despite the tensions of the Cold War, the Soviet Union achieved remarkable feats in science and technology. In 1957, the world watched in awe as Sputnik, the first artificial satellite, orbited the Earth. It was a triumph of Soviet engineering and a symbolic victory in the space race. The Soviet Union continued to push the boundaries of space exploration. Yuri Gagarin became the first human in space in 1961, another blow to American pride. These achievements showcased the Soviet Union's technological prowess and fueled the dreams of a future among the stars. Section 7: Cracks in the system, seeds of doubt. Beneath the surface of Soviet power, cracks began to appear. The command economy, while successful in industrializing the country, was inefficient and inflexible. Consumer goods were scarce and living standards lagged behind those of the West. Moreover, the suppression of dissent and the lack of political freedom bred resentment. Dissident voices, though silenced, whispered of change. The seeds of doubt had been sown, and they would eventually blossom into a powerful force for change. And Section 8: Gorbachev reform and unintended consequences. In 1985, Mikhail Gorbachev became the leader of the Soviet Union. Recognizing the need for change, he introduced reforms known as perestroika, or restructuring, and glasnost, or openness. Gorbachev's aim was to revitalize the Soviet system, not destroy it. However, Gorbachev's reforms had unintended consequences. Glasnost unleashed a torrent of criticism as long-suppressed grievances surfaced. Perestroika, meant to reform the economy, led to shortages and economic instability. The Soviet Union was teetering on the brink. Section 9: The wall falls, a superpower crumbles. In 1989, the Berlin Wall, a potent symbol of Cold War division, crumbled. Across Eastern Europe, communist regimes collapsed like dominoes. The Soviet Union, weakened by internal problems and the loss of its satellite states, could only watch as its empire disintegrated. On December 25, 1991, the Soviet flag flew for the last time over the Kremlin. The Soviet Union, once a superpower that had challenged the world order, ceased to exist. It was the end of an era, a pivotal moment in human history. Section 10: The legacy of the Soviet Union, echoes of a superpower. The Soviet Union is gone, but its legacy continues to shape the world we live in. Its influence can be seen in the political structures, economic policies, and social dynamics of many countries that were once part of this vast empire. The echoes of its existence resonate through the corridors of power and the streets of everyday life. The collapse of the Soviet Union marked the end of the Cold War and the triumph of democracy and capitalism. It was a momentous event that signaled a shift in global power dynamics, leading to the emergence of the United States as the sole superpower. The fall of the Berlin Wall became a symbol of freedom and the victory of democratic ideals over authoritarian regimes. But it also left behind a complex legacy of political, economic, and social challenges. The transition from a centrally planned economy to a market-based system was fraught with difficulties, leading to economic instability and hardship for many. Political unrest and social upheaval became common as newly independent states struggled to find their footing. From the rise of new nations to the resurgence of old rivalries, the echoes of the Soviet Union are still felt today. The geopolitical landscape of Eastern Europe and Central Asia continues to be shaped by the legacies of Soviet policies and the power vacuums left in its wake. Conflicts in regions like Ukraine and the Caucasus are stark reminders of the unresolved tensions from that era. The Soviet experiment, though ultimately unsuccessful, offers valuable lessons about the dangers of totalitarianism, the perils of unchecked state power, and the importance of maintaining a balance between state control and individual freedoms. The propaganda and political machinations of the Soviet era serve as a cautionary tale for future generations, the importance of individual liberty, and the resilience of the human spirit in the face of oppression. The stories of dissidents and cultural movements that emerged during the Soviet era highlight the enduring desire for freedom and self-expression, and the enduring human spirit's desire for a better world. The legacy of the Soviet Union is a complex tapestry of triumphs and tragedies, lessons and legacies that continue to inform our understanding of power, freedom, and the human condition. As we look to the future, we must remember the past and strive to build a world that honors the sacrifices and aspirations of those who came before us.